The segment was meant to be light, just another celebrity guest, just another chef, showing off, but when the arrogant cook mocked Spanish traditions on live TV, something shifted in Keanu Reeves. He paused, looked across the table, and spoke with a quiet fire that no one expected. What he said next didn't just silence the studio, it rewrote the moment entirely. Oh, and before we continue, tell us, what's your favorite Keanu Reeves movie of all time? Let us know in the comments. The bright studio lights of global kitchen masters cast their familiar glow across the sleek set, where celebrity chef Marcus Thornfield adjusts his pristine white jacket with the practiced arrogance of a man who has never met a camera he couldn't charm at 42. Built an empire on sharp with sharper knives and an even sharper tongue. Thathers made him both beloved and reviled across the culinary world. Tonight's episode promises to be particularly explosive. The theme is international fusion, and Marcus has made no secret of his disdain for what he calls peasant cuisines that dare to compete with French culinary sophistication. His recent comments about Spanish food being glorified tapas forterists have already sparked controversy across social media, but Marcus thrives on controversy. It keeps him relevant, keeps the booking agents calling, keeps his restaurants and packed with diners eager to experience his legendary cruelty firsthand. Seat Dacrus from Marcus in the guest chair is an unexpected presence. Keanu Reeves' woes, calm demeanor and simple black t-shirt create a stark contrast to Thechev's flashy appearance. Keanu isn't here to promote a film or discuss his latest project. He's here because the show's producers, desperate for rating him to appear as a cultural ambassador for international cuisine, knowing his well-documented love of travel and appreciation for diverse cultures would provide interesting conversation. What the producers don't know is that Keanu has spent time in Spain over the past 2 years, not for movie roles or publicitators, but for deeply personal reasons that have connected him to the country and its people in ways that go far beyond casual tourism. He's learned the language, studied the history, and most importantly, experienced the profound generosity and warmth of Spanish families who welcomed him into their homes during some of his most difficult moments. The show's host, Miranda Wells, settles into her chair between the two women, her perfectly styled blonde hair and practiced smile radiating the artificial warmth that has made her a television favorite for over a decade. She's interviewed enough celebrities to sense when there's tension in the air, and tonight feels different, charged with an undercurrent she can't quite identify. Welcome back to Global Kitchen Masters, Miranda says, her voice carrying that familiar television cadence. Tonight, we're exploring the beautiful world of international fusion cuisine with our resident culinary expert, Marcus Thornfield, and our special cultural guest, Keanu Reeves. Marcus flashes his trademark smirk, the expression that has graced magazine covers and launched 1,000 memes. He's in his element, surrounded by cameras and attention, ready to deliver the kind of cutting commentary that has made him famous. To say, Miranda. Marcus begins his British accent, lending authority to his words. It's refreshing to discuss real cuisine with someone who appreciates quality. Too often, these cultural appreciation segments turn into sentimental nonsense about authentic foods that wouldn't pass muster in any serious kitchen. Keanu remains silent, his dark eyes studying Marcus with their patient attention he brings to everything in his life. Those who know him well would recognize the stillness, not passivity, but the calm of someone who listens before speaking, who processes before reacting. Marcus. Miranda continues consulting her notes. You've been quite vocal recently about your thoughts on Spanish cuisine. Would you care to elaborate for our viewers? Marcus's eyes light up with anticipation of someone about to deliver a performance. He's clearly Heresido. Miranda, where do I begin? Spanish food is the perfect example of what happens when you mistake tradition for talent. They take perfectly good ingredients, and well, let's just say they do very little with them. The first barb lands with casual cruelty, but Marcus is just getting started. He's built his reputation on moments like this, where his supposed expertise gives him license to demolish entire cultures. Culinary contrines with wit and condescension, Keanu shifts almost imperceptibly in his scare. To most viewers he appears unchanged, the same calm presence he's always been, but something in his posture has shifted, a subtle tension that he's not just listening to Marcus's words, but evaluating them, weighing them against his own experiences. Marcus squirming to his theme. You have a country that's been cooking the same handful of dishes for centuries, and they expect you to be impressed. Pagella is just rice with whatever they found lying around Germany. Barrico is just expensive ham that they've convinced the world is somehow special, and don't even get me started on their so-called fine dining scene. Miranda laughs, along playing her role as the accommodating host, but she glances nervously at Keanu, sensing that the cultural ambassador she brought on to provide balance might have something to say about Marcus' increasingly inflammatory commentary. But Keanu, silent, his expression unchanged, though those who know him might notice that way his hands have stilled completely on his knees, a sign that he's not just listening anymore, but preparing it, as Marcus continues his verbal assault on Spanish culture, building momentum with each dismissive comment. Neither he nor Miranda realizes they're about to witness something extraordinary. Keanu Reeves is about to demonstrate that sometimes the most devastating responses come from the quietest people, and that true cultural understanding can be the most powerful weapon against arrogant ignorance. Marcus leans back in his chair with the confidence of a man who has never been challenged on his own. Show his perfectly groomed beard catching the studio lights as he prepares to deliver what he clearly considers his masterpiece of cultural criticism. You know what really bothers me about Spanish cuisine, Marcus continues, his voice dripping with condescension, is how it's been elevated far beyond its actual merit by food tourists who mistake quaint for quality. Miranda nods along, though her glance toward Keanu are becoming more frequent. She can sense something building in the studio atmosphere, a tension that goes beyond typical cooking show banter. Take flamenco cooking, for instance. Marcus says in air quotes with theatrical disdain. They've turned the simple act of preparing basic ingredients into some kind of mystical performance art. It's all style, no substance, very Spanishly. The comment lands like a slap, not just against Spanish cuisine, but against Spanish culture itself. Marcus has crossed from food criticism into cultural mockery, but he's too intoxicated by his own wit to recognize the line he's crossed. Keanu's expression remains unchanged, but his breathing has slowed, a meditation technique he's practiced for years, a way of maintaining center when faced with ignorance or cruelty. He's heard this kind of dismissive commentary before, usually from people who mistake volume for authority, who confuse opinion with expertise in their wine culture. Marcus' contunes, clearly building toward a crescendo of cultural dismissal, is perhaps the most overrated in Europethy. Make pedestrian reds and call them reservoirs, charge premium prices for bottles that wouldn't qualify as house wine in a proper French establishment. Teach word is chosen for maximum impact, designed to provoke reaction and controversy. Marcus has built his career on moments like this, where his supposed sophistication gives him license to tear down what others hold dear. But what truly astounds me, Marcus says, his voice gaining momentum, is how they've managed to export this mediocrity to the rest of the world. Spanish restaurants in New York, London, Tokyo, all serving the same tired tapas, the same uninspirated pies, pretending that tradition somehow equals innovation. Miranda shifts comfortably in her chair as a television host. She's skilled at managing difficult moments, but Marcus is venturing into territory that feels unnecessarily cruel. Unnecessarily epaules. Marcus, she interjects gently, surely you can appreciate the cultural significance of traditional cultural significance. Marcus interrupts with, allure that carries no warmth is what we call food when it doesn't taste good now. To stand on its own merits, Spanish cuisine is a perfect example of style over substance, of marketing over mastery. He turns toward Keanu for the first time, perhaps expecting support from someone he assumes shares his cosmopolitan sensibilities. Keanu Reeves traveled extensively. You must have noticed how Spanish food pales in comparison to truly sophisticated cuisines like French or Japanese. It's a trap disguised as an invitation, an attempt to draw Keanu into Marcus' web of cultural supremacy. The chef clearly expects the actor to either agree with this assessment or offer some diplomatic non-answer that won't challenge his authority. Instead, Keanu meets Marcus' gaze with steady eyes and says simply, I have a different experience of Spain. The words are quiet, almost gentle, but they carry an undertone that makes Marcus pause. There's something in Keanu's voice, not anger, not defensiveness, but a certainty that suggests depths Marcus hasn't considered. Oh, Marcus responds, his tone shifting slightly as he senses potential assistance to his narrative. And what experience would that be? Personal experience, Keanu replies, his voice remaining calm but gaining substance, not professional criticism or culinary theory, just personal experience. The distinction lands in the studio like a challenge. Marcus has been operating from the position of supposed expertise, while Keanu is claiming something more valuable, authentic lived experience. While Marcus says his smile becoming more predatory, I'm sure personal experience is lovely, but we're discussing cuisine from a professional perspective here. Sentiment doesn't change the fundamental limitations of Spanish cooking. He's escalating, now sensing that he needs to reassert his authority before Keanu's quiet confidence undermines his position, but Marcus doesn't realize that he's about to face someone whose understanding of Spanish culture goes far deeper than anything Marcus has ever experienced. I'm curious though. Marcus continues, his voice taking on a mocking edge. What exactly convinced you that Spanish peasant food deserves our respect? The question hangs in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, and everyone the studio can sense that something significant is about to happen. Yet Marcus has no idea that his casual cruelty towards Spanish culture is about to collide with someone who has discovered that culture's true depth, and who has the quiet strength to defend it in ways the arrogant chef never saw coming. Marcus, emboldened by what he perceives as Keanu's reluctance to engage in direct confrontation, leans forward with the predatory enthusiasm of Demean, who senses weakness. The studio lights catch the gleam in his eyes as he prepares to deliver what he clearly believes will be his knockout blow. You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus says, his voice rising with theatrical authority. This romantic notion that somehow experiencing a culture makes you qualified to judge its cuisine. It's like saying you understand architecture because you've walked through a building. The analogy is deliberately reductive, designed to diminish Keanu's claim to authentic understanding. Marcus has spent his career establishing hierarchies where only professional credentials matter, where personal experience is dismissed as mere sentiment. Miranda attempts to intervene, sensing the conversation veering toward dangerous territory. Perhaps we could discuss some specific dishes. No, this is important. Marcus interrupts, his British accent lending false gravitas to his escalating attack. We have a perfect example here of how Spanish culture has managed to seduce even intelligent people into believing that authenticity equals quality. He gestures toward Keanu with dismissive theatric flair, treating him like a case study rather than a person. I'm sure Keanu had lovely experiences in Spain. I'm sure he met wonderful people, enjoyed beautiful sunsets, felt very connected to the local culture, but that doesn't change the fundamental reality that Spanish cuisine is at its core limited. Word limited hangs in the air like an insult, not just to Spanish food but to anyone who might find value in it. Marcus has weaponized his supposed sophistication, using it to create a hierarchy where only his judgment matters. Spanish cooking is constrained by its ingredients, constrained by its techniques, constrained by its unwillingness to evolve beyond medieval preparation methods. Marcus continues, his voice gaining momentum. They've taken simplicity, which, let's be honest, is often just another word for primitiveness, and tried to rebrand it as virtue. Keanu's hands remain perfectly still on his knees, but something has shifted. In his breathing pattern, those familiar with meditation would recognize the signs not of agitation, but of Demean centering themselves for what's to come, and the Spanish people themselves. Marcus says, crossing a line of thought transforms food criticism into cultural assault, have this tragic pride in their limitations. They refuse to acknowledge that their beloved traditional dishes are just basic rices of food, some vegetables thrown together and called paella, bread with tomato and oil called what? Do they call it? Pan consummate revolutionary. The mockery in his voice is unmistakable. Marcus has moved from criticizing food to ridiculing an entire culture's relationships with its own identity. They've built an entire national identity around cooking techniques that any competent culinary student could master in an afternoon. He continues, completely unaware that with each word's revealing more about his own ignorance than about Spanish culture. Miranda makes another attempt to steer conversation towards safer ground. Marcus, surely you can appreciate what I appreciate. Marcus cuts her off again. His honesty and honest assessment reveals that Spanish cuisine is popular because it's safe, because it requires nothing from the diner except the ability to appreciate basic flavors. Bind. In obvious ways he turns back toward Keanu, his smile now openly condescending. I'm sure your Spanish friends were lovely hosts. Keanu, I'm sure they welcomed you with great warmth and shared their family recipes with touching generosity, but sentiment doesn't change objective reality. The word sentiment is delivered like a weapon, designed to dismiss Keanu's entire experience as emotional, rather than substantive Marcus, has created a framework where only his professional judgment counts, where personal connection is seen as weakness, rather than insight. Spanish cuisine is popular among tourists. Marcus concludes with false authority, because tourists aren't looking for culinary excellence. They're looking for Instagram moments and emotional experiences. They want to feel like they've discovered something authentic, even if that authenticity is fundamentally mediocre. The final word lands like a slap across Spanish culture itself. Marcus's transformed white began as food criticism into a systematic demolition of an entire people's relationship with their own heritage. Throughout this escalating assault, Keanu has remained silent, his calm exterior unchanged, but those who know him might notice the way his shoulders have settled. The way his breathing has deepened, signs that he's not just enduring Marcus' cultural vandalism, but preparing to respond to it. Yet what Marcus doesn't realize is that this arrogant dismissal of Spanish culture has just collided with someone whose connection to Spain goes far deeper than tourism or casual appreciation. Someone who has been welcomed into Spanish homes, not as a celebrity, but as a human being in need of healing. Someone who understands that Marcus' supposed sophistication is about to meet something far more powerful: authentic love for a people and culture he has learned to call family. In the space between Marcus's words and the need to respond, Keanu finds himself transported to a small kitchen in Seville, where an elderly woman named Carmen taught him to make proper gazpacho, while tears streamed down his face, not from the onions, but from grief been carrying alone for too long. The memory surfaces unbidden as Marcus continues to tear apart the culture that had embraced Keanu during one of the darkest periods of his life. He remembers Carmen's weathered hands guiding his own as she showed him how to balance tomatoes, peppers, and bread, not just ingredients, but a tradition passed down through generations of women who had fed their families through civil war poverty and countless smaller struggles. The thing about Spanish simplicity, Marcus is saying, his voice seeming to come from a great distance, is that it reveals the limitations of the culture itself. They've never moved beyond basic survival cooking because they've never needed to its peasant food. Elevated by nostalgia and marketing, each word hits Keanu like a physical blow, not because they wound his pride, but because they dismissed the profound humanity he experienced in Spain. Marcus is reducing to peasant food the meals that sustained him when he couldn't eat, the conversations around tables that lasted until dawn, the way Spanish families had upon their homes, to a grieving stranger simply because he needed their warmth in his mind. Keanu can hear the laughter of the Mendoza family in Barcelona, who spent 3 weeks teaching him to make proper paella, not the tourist version Marcus clearly imagines, but the where each grain of rice is treated with reverence, where the cooking becomes a meditation on patience and respect for ingredients. He remembers how Zena Mendoza, a retired fisherman, had explained that paella wasn't just a booth final dish, but about the gathering, about family and friends coming together around the ritual of cooking, about the stories shared while the rice slowly absorbed the flavors, about the way food becomes love made visible. They missed a kiloborage presentation for substance. Marcus continues, completely unaware that this critique is revealing his own fundamental misunderstanding of what Spanish cuisine actually represents. Keanu thinks about the 3-hour lunches in small villages where time moved differently, where every meal was a celebration of connection rather than consumption. He remembers conversations with local chefs who spoke of their ingredients with the reverence Marcus reserves for his own ego: tomatoes grown in specific soil, olive oil pressed from trees their grandfathers planted, seafood caught that morning by fishermen whose families had worked the same waters for centuries. The contrast between Marcus's performance and Keanu's memories, Crotessa, growing pressure in his chest, not anger exactly, but something deeper, the need to bear witness, to speak truth. In the face of willful ignorance, he remembers Isabella, the young chef in San Sebastian, who had spent an entire evening explaining the philosophy behind Basque cooking, how every technique, every combination of flavors carried the weight of cultural identity, of survival of a people who had maintained their distinctiveness. Despite centuries of pressure to assimilate Spanish Kaizenlach's ambition, Marcus is saying now, his voice growing more dismissive with each word, it's comfortable with mediocrity, because the culture itself is comfortable with mediocrity. The words pierce through Keanu's measured calm, like arrows finding their target. Marcus isn't just criticizing food anymore. He's attacking the character of people who had shown Keanu more genuine warmth and generosity than he'd experienced anywhere else in the world. In that moment, Keanu makes a decision not to defend Spanish cuisine as a tourist might with about authenticity, but to speak from the place Marcus kinetics is, from genuine understanding earned through genuine relationship. His breathing settles into the rhythm he learned during meditation retreats, but also during those long afternoons in Spanish kitchens where cooking became a form of mindfulness, where every action was performed with intention and respect. Marcus has revealed himself to be exactly what Spanish hospitality taught Keanu to recognize: someone who mistakes volume for authority, who confuses criticism for insight, who has never learned that true sophistication comes from humility rather than arrogance. The studio lights feel hotter now, and Miranda is shifting nervously in her chair, sensing that the energy in the room has changed. Marcus continues his cultural assault, completely unaware that he's about to face someone whose understanding of Spanish culture was earned through genuine relationship rather than professional posturing. Yet what Marcus doesn't realize is that his elaborate performance of culinary superiority is about to collide with something far more powerful than expertise: authentic love, learned through authentic connection and defended with the quiet strength that comes from knowing the difference between wisdom and mere cleverness. The moment arrives with the quiet inevitability of dawn breaking over the horizon. Marcus has just finished another elaborate dismissal of Spanish culture when Keanu speaks, his voice cutting through the studio noise with unexpected clarity. Carmen Vasquez taught me to make gazpacho in her kitchen in Seville. Keanu says simply, and something in his tone makes everyone in the studio pay attention in a way they haven't before. Marcus pauses mid-gesture, caught off guard by the specificity of the statement. This isn't the vague tourist appreciation he expected to dismiss, but something more concrete, more personal. She's 84 years old, Keanu continues, his voice gaining strength with each word. Her husband died in 1975 during the transition from Franco's dictatorship. She raised 4 children, alone, working 16-hour days in a textile factory, and every evening she came home and cooked dinner for her family. Studio has fallen completely silent. Even Marcus seems to sense that something significant is happening, though he doesn't yet understand what. Carmen's gazpacho recipe came from her grandmother, who lived through the Spanish Civil War. Keanu says his eyes never leaving Marcus' face during the siege of Seville, when there was no meat, no cheese, sometimes no bread. Her grandmother kept her family alive, knowing exactly how to combine tomatoes, peppers, garlic and olive oil to create something nourishing from almost nothing. The words land in the studio like into still water, creating ripples of understanding that spread outward from Keanu's quiet intensity. You call it peasant food. Keanu continues, but Carmen's grandmother called it survival. Sheehan called it love, sheckled it the difference between her children living and dying. Marcus opens his mouth to respond, but something in Keanu's expression stops him. This isn't the diplomatic pushback he expected from a celebrity trying to avoid controversy. This is something deeper, more personal, more real. I spent 3 weeks in Carmen's kitchen, Keanu says, not because I wanted to learn about Spanish cuisine, but because I was broken. I had just lost someone very important to me, and I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't see any point in getting a pizza. Morning. Miranda's eyes widen as she realizes they've moved far by untypical talk show territory into something more vulnerable and honest than television usually allows. Carmen didn't speak much English, and my Spanish was terrible, Keanu continues, but she took one look at me and knew exactly what I needed. She sat me down at her kitchen table and started teaching me to make gazpacho, not because she thought it needed to learn about Spanish culture, but because she knew I needed to remember how to take care of myself. Vulnerability in his admission creates a profound shift in the studio atmosphere. This isn't celebrity storytelling, this is genuine human experience being shared in real time for 3 hours. Keanu says Carmen taught me to select tomatoes to balance acid and salt, to understand when the texture was exactly right. She didn't speak about tradition or authenticity or cultural pride. She just showed me with infinite patience how to create something beautiful from simple ingredients. Marcus shifts uncomfortably in his chair, beginning to understand that his earlier dismissals have collided with something far more substantial than tourist appreciation. When we finished, Keanu continues, Carmen ladled the gazpacho into 2 bowls and we sat in her kitchen and ate. Together. Was the first meal I'd been able to finish in weeks, and as I ate, Carmen told him about her husband, about her children, about the summers when her grandmother taught heard this same recipe of his memories. The emotion underlying his calm delivery creates an atmosphere of sacred storytelling that has transformed the studio into something approaching a confessional. You want to know what Spanish cuisine really is? Keanu asks, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since the chef began his cultural assault. It's Carmen refusing to let a broken stranger leave her kitchen hungry. It's her understanding that food isn't just about taste or technique. It's about the preservation of life, of family, of happy. Words hit Marcus like physical blows. Every criticism he's made, every dismissive comment about Spanish simplicity and lack of ambition has been revealed as fundamentally ignorant of food. Spanish culture actually represents Spanish cuisine is the Mendoza family in Barcelona, spending their entire Sunday teaching me to make paella. Keanu continues, not because they wanted to show off their cooking skills, but because they wanted to share something that mattered to them, because they understood that cooking together creates connection, creates family, and creates the bonds that make life bearable. Marcus tries to interrupt, but Keanu's quiet intensity prevents him from finding words adequate to the moment. You call Spanish food limited, Keanu says, his voice now carrying an authority that fills the studio. But what you're really saying is that you don't understand the difference between sophistication and complication, between skill and showmanship, between feeding people and performing for them. But as Keanu prepares to deliver the full weight of his understanding about Spanish culture and Marcus' fundamental misunderstanding what cuisine actually means, the studio audience senses they're about tiredness, something extraordinary, not just a defense of Spanish culture, but a masterclass in how authentic experience trumps arrogant opinion. Every single time the studio lights seem to dim around Keanu, as his voice takes on the quiet authority of someone who has moved beyond polite disagreemento, the realm of truthling. Marcus sits frozen in his chair, feeling that he's no longer controlling this conversation. You want to talk about sophistication, Marcus? Keanu asks, his tone remaining gentle but carrying unmistakable steel underneath. Let me tell you about sophistication. The challenge is laid down with surgical precision, and everyone in the studio can feel the shift in power dynamics happening in real time. A sophistication is Jose Luis Herrera, a chef in San Sebastian, spending 40 years perfecting a sauce that has only 5 ingredients. Keanu continues, not because he lacks imagination, but because he understands that true mastery means knowing exactly how much is enough. Marcus's attempts to interject, but Keanu's momentum is building, and the moral authority of his words prevents interruptions. Sophistication is understanding that the best Germani burrito requires pigs that feed on acorns for exactly the right number of months, in exactly the right climate, handled by families who have been perfecting this craft for generations. Keanu says it's knowing that excellence comes from patience, from respect for process, from understanding that some things cannot be rushed or improved upon through cleverness. Each word is delivered with the precision of someone who has learned these truths through direct experience rather than professional theory. You dismiss Spanish wine, Keanu continues, but have you ever sat with a venter in Rio who can taste the difference between grapes grown on the north-facing slopes versus the south-facing slopes of the same vineyard? Have you ever listened to someone explain how the limestone of soil affects the minerality of wine in ways that take decades to understand? The questions aren't rhetorical, they're exposing the superficiality of Marcus' supposed expertise, revealing it as performance rather than genuine knowledge. Spanish cuisine isn't simple because Spanish people lack ambition, Keanu's sagacious voice gaining strength. It's precise because Spanish people understand that the highest form of art is making the complex appear effort. Watches in fascination as the dynamics in her studio continue to shift. The quiet actor she invited as a cultural ambassador has revealed himself to be someone with deeper understanding, her supposed expert. You mock pantomime, Keanu continues, but have you ever made it properly? Have you ever selected tomatoes at exactly the right stage of ripeness, grated them by hand to achieve the perfect texture, balanced them with olive oil that carries the taste of specific trees and specific groves? Specificity of his knowledge is overwhelming. Marcus' general criticism revealing the difference between authentic understanding and superficial judgment. Have you ever shared pan con tomato with a family who treats it not as a simple appetizer, but as a daily ritual of connection? Keanu asks, who understands that the act of preparing food together, of eating together, of talking together around a table, is what transforms ingredients into cuisine. The questions are dismantling Marcus' entire framework of culinary criticism, revealing it as fundamentally disconnected from what food actually means to the people who create and share you say. Spanish culture is comfortable with mediocrity. Keanu Reeves' voice, now carrying the full weight of his experience, but what you're really revealing is that you don't understand the difference between excellence and exhibitionism. The distinction hits Marcus like a physical blow, exposing his entire culinary philosophy as performance art rather than genuine craft. Spanish excellence is quiet, Keanu continues. It doesn't announce itself with complicated presentations or exotic ingredients. It reveals itself through generosity, through hospitality, through the understanding that the height of cooking is not to impress strangers but to nourish the people you love. Marcus finally finds his voice, attempting to reassert his authority. But Sully, you can acknowledge that Spanish cuisine lacks the technical innovation of oven. Keanu interrupts, and for the first time his voice carries a note of incredulity. Marcus, Spanish chefs created molecular gastronomy. Veranda revolutionized contemporary cuisine. Joan Rocker has been voted best chef in the world multiple times. The facts land like hammer blows, revealing the stunning ignorance underlying Marcus' supposed expertise. A bit more importantly, Keanu continues, Spanish culture understands something that you seem to have missed entirely, that the purpose of innovation in cuisine isn't to show off technical skill, it's to enhance the fundamental human experience of sharing food together. The philosophical distinction exposes poverty of Marcus' approach to food, revealing it as ego-driven rather than human-centered. Spanish cuisine has endured for centuries, Keanu says, not because Spanish people lack ambition, but because they've achieved something you apparently can't recognize. They've created a food culture that serves life, rather than demanding that life serve. Its final judgment settles over the studio like a benediction, and Marcus sits in stunned silence, his entire worldview challenged by someone whose quiet authority has revealed the emperor's lack of clothes. But as the studio audience processes what they've just witnessed, not just a defense of Spanish culture, but a masterclass in the difference between wisdom and mere cleverness, it becomes clear that this moment will extend far beyond tonight's television broadcast, allowing everyone present to reconsider what they think they know about culture, cuisine, and the difference between authentic expertise and arrogant performance. The silence that follows Keanu's words is unlike anything the studio has ever experienced. This isn't dramatic pause the television producers love, filled with anticipation for the next plot twist. This is the profound quiet that settles over people when they've witnessed truth spoken with such clarity that argument becomes impossible. Marcus sits in his chair, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. The smirk that has defined his public image has vanished, replaced by something approaching recognition, not of defeat, but of the vast gap between his performed expertise and Keanu's lived understanding. Marcus begins, then stops, seeming to realize that any response will only further expose the poverty of his position. For perhaps the first time in his television career, the man who built his reputation on having the last word finds himself speechless. Miranda to restore some semblance of control to her show. While this has certainly been an enlightening discussion about cultural appreciation and no, Keanu interrupts gently but with now firmness to reclaim the moment. This hasn't been a discussion about appreciation, this has been a demonstration of the difference between judgment and understanding. His words carry a weight that transforms the studio atmosphere. Once again, this isn't just about Spanish cuisine anymore, it's about something larger, something thatches everyone present. Marcus represents something we see everywhere. Keanu continues, his voice calm but carrying reach that extends beyond television cameras. The assumption that confidence equals competence, that volume equals authority, that the ability to criticize demonstrates understanding. The implications of his observation begin to settle over the audience. This is about more than one arrogant chef, it's about a culture that often mistakes performance for substance. But real understanding, Keanu says, comes from humility, from the willingness to be taught rather than to teach, from recognizing that every culture, every tradition, every way of life that has sustained people for generations carries wisdom that we can only access through respect. Marcus shifts in his chair, and for a moment, it seems he might attempt to defend himself, but something in Keanu's expression, not triumph, but genuine compassion, stops him. The Spanish families who welcomed me, Keanu continues, didn't do so because I was a celebrity, because they wanted something From me, they did it because their culture has taught them that hospitality is sacred, that sharing food is sharing life, that opening your home to a stranger, opening your heart to the possibility of connection. The description creates a contrast with Marcus's earlier dismissals, revealing Spanish culture as something rich and generous rather than limited and basic. That's what Spanish cuisine really represents. Keanu says, not the absence of sophistication, but the presence of something more valuable, the understanding that food is fundamentally about love, made visible about community, created through shared experience, about the transformation of simple ingredients into something that sustains not just our bodies but our spirits. The poetry of his words has transformed the television studio into something approaching a sacred space where truth has been spoken with such clarity that it changes everyone who hears it. I learned more about cooking in 3 weeks with Carmen than I could have learned in 3 years of formal training. Keanu concludes, not because she taught me techniques, but because she taught me purpose. Not because she showed me how to impress people, but because she showed me how to nourish them. Marcus finally speaks, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I may have been wrong about some things. The admission hangs in the air like a small miracle for a man who has built his career on absolute certainty. Acknowledging error requires a fundamental shift in how he sees himself and his role in the world. We all get things wrong, Keanu responds with characteristic gentleness. The question is whether we're willing to learn from our mistakes, or whether we'll double down on our ignorance. The grace in his response offers Marcus a path toward redemption that the chef clearly wasn't expecting. As the show winds toward its conclusion, something has fundamentally changed in the studio dynamics. Marcus' arrogance has been revealed as insecurity masquerading as authority. Keanu's quiet confidence has demonstrated the power of authentic experience over performed expertise. But perhaps most importantly, everyone present has witnessed something rare in contemporary culture: someone choosing grace over triumph, understanding over victory, compassion over conquest. The cameras continue rolling, but the real show is over. In the space where arrogance once lived, something like wisdom has taken root. Marcus' empire of culinary criticism will never be theism, and neither will anyone who witnessed this quiet revolution where authentic understanding triumphed over performed authority. The next morning, social media explodes with clips from the show, but unlike typical viral moments built on conflict and drama, this one spreads because it demonstrates something: people hunger for the possibility of grace in the face of ignorance, wisdom in response to arrogance, and the quiet power of choosing understanding over victory. Spanish restaurants across the world increased reservations, cooking schools see enrollment spikes in Mediterranean cuisine courses, but more importantly, people begin having different conversations about culture, about respect, about the difference between expertise and experience. Marcus, for his part, quietly announces a hiatus from television industry. Insiders report he's been spotted in various Spanish cities, not as a celebrity chef making grand pronouncements, but as a student eating at family-run restaurants and listening more than he speaks. And Keanu returns to his quiet life, carrying with him the satisfaction that sometimes when truth meets arrogance, truth wins, not through volume or aggression, but through the simple power of authentic understanding shared with grace. The Spanish families who welcomed him during his darkest hours will never know that their kindness was defended on international television, but somewhere in Seville, Carmen Vasquez continues making gas pro in her kitchen, creating love from simple ingredients, one bowl at a time.